You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is about community, and we welcome your participation at the station.
3CR is open to a wide diversity of volunteers and is a great way to connect with Melbourne's activist community.
Have you ever thought about volunteering, doing a reception shift, getting a program on air?
Training in radio skills or contributing to one of the station's committees.
There are many ways to be involved at 3CR.
To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au and get in touch.
That plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. This radio program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. It's broadcast across Australia, courtesy of the Community Radio Network, north to south, east to west, all around the world. That's right, that's the power of disinformation, misinformation. If you wonder what anarchy is all about, anarchos without rulers. That's right, anarchos without rulers. Not without rules, without rulers. What gives rulers the ability to do what they're doing in Gaza, or what they're doing in Victoria or Australia? Inequalities in power and wealth. So the anarchist struggles, the struggle to devolve, that's shared power, possibly through direct democratic means, and the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. Exceptionally conservative concepts. Obviously, the pathway to this endpoint is much more radical, but the endpoint is exceptionally conservative. Exceptionally conservative. Holding wealth in common, using it for the common good, using the collective abilities of people to resolve the issues that we face. Now, it's a fascinating period in history, and obviously every day is a fascinating day if you wake up one way or another, or it's fascinatingly good or fascinatingly bad. But I'm interested in trying to make sense of what's happening in the world today, because if we can't make sense of what's happening in the world today, we tend to either despair and become nihilistic and believe change is impossible, or latch onto some type of religious belief or some type of misinformation or disinformation, and it becomes our very essence, and we tend to ignore reality. And ignoring reality does have consequences, and sometimes quite brutal consequences. It's like seeing a snake and deciding to try to catch the snake with your bare hands because, you're all powerful. The fact is that in 99% of cases you'll be bitten. It's the same with life. If you ignore reality, you will be bitten. So I want to look at this idea that corporate capitalism is the midwife of authoritarian populism. Because wherever you look in the world today, authoritarianism is on the rise. Not in terms of some type of political ideology which is useful for people, but authoritarianism in terms of the concentration of power and wealth in fewer and fewer hands, and the impact that has on societies. Now, people tend to laugh at the Trumps of the world, but the fact is the Trumps of the world are the people who are on the ascendancy currently. And you've got authoritarian populism, as you see to some degree in the United States of America and to some degree in good old Russia. Then you've got, your classical authoritarianism, which you have in China and North Korea. And then you've got your religious authoritarianism, which we see on the rise around the world, whether it's Modi's India and Hindu nationalism or Muslim fundamentalism. We see people attaching religious beliefs, and that's the key word, religious beliefs, to authoritarian mechanisms which bring about the growth of strong leaders, or strong rulers, I should say, who have the capacity, in inverted commas, to solve the problems of the world. Now, we seem to have forgotten the history of the early 20th century, the mid-20th century, that fascism is fascism. And fascism, to a significant degree, is based on authoritarian populism, where a shrinking minority, and in some cases one individual, as we saw in Stalin's Russia and Pol Pot's Cambodia, has extraordinary powers. Now, it's not unusual for human beings to, how shall I put it, to, cheer authoritarianism. We see it in our own country in terms of the monarchy. And we see it in terms of the history. The history of the world, to a significant degree, has been the history of authoritarians seizing power or being pushed into power by individuals and communities that have lost faith in a system that governs them. And that's the key, losing faith in the system that governs you. Now, I know everybody's saying currently that there has never been so many people that have gone to the polls in human history. Well, I'm sure that's correct. We now have 8 billion people. And we've seen an election in Russia. We're about to see an election in India. We've seen an election in Indonesia. We've seen an election in Iran. And that's almost half the world's population. But the fact is, it's not about policy. It's about putting people in authority who you believe will make significant changes to your life. And that's the attraction of an authoritarian leader. You can leave it up to that authoritarian ruler to set the agenda which makes some meaning of your life. So why do we find ourselves in this situation? I mean, the 19th century and most of the 20th century was littered with examples of people breaking the power of authoritarian rulers, whether hereditary or self-appointed. We saw it in Russia in the Russian Revolution. We saw it in China during the Chinese Revolution. We saw it in Western Europe, where the monarchs were pushed aside by parliamentary democracy. So why, almost at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, do we see the rise and rise and rise of authoritarian rulers, whether they're self-appointed or elected? And there is one common element. And that's the failure of parliamentary democracy, which theoretically is rule of the people, by the people, for the people, by an engaged public. It's gross failures. And it's gross failures because the sovereign nation state, which theoretically looks after the interests of its citizens, has been hijacked by corporate capitalism, by institutions based on a private investment for private profit model, which have an inordinate amount of power, not just in terms of acquiring wealth, but in terms of influencing the parliamentary agenda to ensure that legislation which challenges its power never seems to get through the parliamentary system. So we have now seen the total failure of parliamentary democracy to deliver the goods. And the whole purpose of parliamentary democracy was for people to be able to elect representatives to Parliament to represent their interests and pass legislation and pass laws, which means passing laws to ensure that their interests were put before the interests of minorities, powerful minorities, vested interests in the community. And in almost every nation state which has gone down the parliamentary road, we have now seen the failure, the total failure of that system to deliver the goods. I'll give you a simple example. In Victoria, the state government has embarked on a policy, and it's a Victorian Labor state government, on a policy of destroying public housing and replacing it with privately owned social and community housing. And the next step is to destroy and replace 44 towers which house tens of thousands of people in public housing with community and social housing. Now, as far as resistance to the privatisation of public housing, that resistance has been minimal, except among the Victorian Greens and obviously some socialist groups and some anarchist groups and some community focus groups, has been minimal because the community has accepted the idea that community and social housing, the privatisation of social housing, is the best thing. But there is a little glimmer of hope. The Victorian Greens today, which is the 20th of March if you're listening to this program live, 2024, hope to pass a motion in the Victorian Legislative Council to hold a public inquiry into the Labor Party's, which is the government of the day, public housing policies, especially its policy to destroy 44 public housing towers which house thousands of people. So why is it? Why is it that simple legislation to create public housing never seems to be at the forefront of people's thinking? Why is it that over the last 40 to 50 years we have allowed the privatisation juggernaut to destroy publicly owned facilities, many profitable, which provided services to people, allow them to slide into private hands. And 40 to 50 years later, we are now reaping the so-called benefits of privatisation, which there are no benefits to privatisation of publicly owned assets. No benefits whatsoever. So why over the last 40 years have we seen this huge drive towards privatisation of public property? I mean, we've got to the ridiculous situation in this country. We don't even own our airports, our seaports, our mining, the minerals under the ground. It's a ridiculous situation. I mean, the most common ad you see if you're still watching television or going on social media, one of the most common ad is some charitable trust trying to raise money to ensure that Australian kids and people have enough to eat. This isn't Gaza. This is Australia 2024. Well, at the same time, we have never seen as many billionaires, not millionaires, billionaires created in this country. So if we live in a parliamentary democracy, which is based on the concept of rule of the people, by the people, for the people, why do we continue to see legislation pass through Parliament ad nauseum, week after week, year after year, which increases the power of unaccountable corporations, some privately owned, many on the stock market? Is it because they provide a better service? Ask somebody in an aged care facility if that's true. Is it because somehow the corporatisation of the economy has helped small business? Now, everybody talks about how small business is important in this country. The fact is, small business is going out of business at a huge rate, not just because of government impost, because of the inability to compete against corporations which now dominate the marketplace. I mean, that's what corporatisation is. Now, I know that on this program every week we use the 4 words, not the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, but the 4 words: corporatisation, globalisation, deregulation, privatisation. I mean, they may mean nothing to you, but the fact is we now have a situation where transnational corporations, whether they're technological giants or not, dictate government policy to such a degree that even a sovereign nation state as rich economically as Australia cannot even address the basic needs of so many of its citizens. Because you see, privatisation has an effect on everybody. Corporatisation has an effect on everybody. I mean, we've got to the ridiculous situation where you've got to pass legislation in order to ensure that private corporations compete. And the fact is, that's right, we, you and me, we have allowed this situation to occur. We have allowed this situation to occur. That's right. You and I have allowed the corporatisation, globalisation, privatisation, deregulation mantra reign supreme in our society. Because we believe the misinformation and disinformation that by privatising public assets, by allowing corporations to get bigger and bigger, by removing regulations, And by opening up our markets, in inverted commas, our markets, their markets, somehow we would all prosper. The reality is different. We haven't prospered. And the fact is that while we continue to believe the myths, and that's what it is, belief and myths, belief in myths. I mean, some people believe there are fairies in the bottom of the garden. Other people believe in some supernatural entity. Others believe they can walk on water. And the fact is, beliefs have nothing to do with reality. And the grim reality of the economic, that's right, economic, social and cultural, and economic, journeys we've taken as a people has led us into these cul-de-sacs where we go round and round and round and round, begging and beseeching, doffing our caps in 19th century style for somebody to do something about it. Well, nobody's going to do anything about it. Because unfortunately, the very people who we campaigned with in the past to resolve these issues of inequality have now joined the corporate gravy train. They now have a superhighway to this country's treasury. And I'm talking about the mega charities which have taken on public contracts to provide private services to the public on behalf of the government, where we see religious-based organisations and non-religious-based organisations receive, as I spoke about last week, billions of dollars in corporate welfare every month, not every year, every month. Billions of dollars. And we've seen the state become nothing more than an entity which hands out contracts to the private sector to provide public services. Now, over the last, 55 years, I've attempted, and the key word is attempted, to change the direction that this country is moving in. Not just me, but many other people. And time again, we have been marginalised and criminalised. We've seen that struggle for fundamental change being co-opted by issue-orientated politics, by identity politics, you name it. But in terms of significant change to who exercise power, who has wealth, how that wealth is distributed, nothing has changed. And nothing will change while we accept the basic premises Australian society is based on. And that basic premise is private investment for private profit. That basic premise is for government to get out of the way of corporations, to allow them to maximise their profits irrespective of the harm which is caused to the community. Nothing highlights this as the housing crisis that we face today as a community. It's totally unacceptable. And it's totally unacceptable that 1/3 of the population relies on social security benefits which don't even meet their basic needs. And it's totally unacceptable that whenever people try to change things through direct action, their actions are criminalised not just by the state, but by a corporate-owned media which dominates social media as well as the legacy media, which sees any move towards any significant change as an attack on them. And it is an attack on them. It's an attack on the centralisation of power and the accumulation of wealth, assisted by authoritarian populists who somehow have the population believe that they have the answer to what are critical social, cultural, economic fault lines in the societies we live in. So we can pull our hair out, and if we haven't got any hair on our heads, we can pull our pubic hairs out. But the fact is, it's not going to help. We can be cynical, as I said. Cynicism is the aphrodisiac of those who wield power. Or we, that's right, you and me, little you and me, can continue this struggle to change society. You can do it at a local level. You can do it at becoming involved in actions around the country. You can join political groups or cultural groups. You can join groups like Public Interest Before Corporate Interests, which you can do online. You can become part of something which is bigger than you. Because that's the reality that we face. Unless we are capable of working collectively and promoting ideas and actions which change the legislative agenda in this country, which doesn't put corporate profits before public health. And public health is not just about, seeing a doctor or a physio or an OT or a psychologist. Public health is about ensuring the health of the economy in terms of the economy meeting the needs of the citizens and residents in this country. Because for far, far too long, we have believed the myth that privatisation provides cheaper, more competitive services. That corporatisation provides cheaper, more competitive services and goods. That globalisation is wonderful for the country. That deregulation is a must as far as the corporate sector is concerned. Because the damage which has been made to this country has become almost irreparable. But the fact is that through human history, we have seen people rise up. And they rise up when the options they have shrink. Unfortunately, in many cases, we see that the pull of the authoritarian populist is exceptionally strong in an era where corporate capitalism has made a fool of the parliamentary system. People are looking for alternatives, but those alternatives cannot be met by an authoritarian ruler. We see it over and over again through human history. That the best way to resolve issues is through mutual aid, collective action, through breaking down hierarchy, through ensuring that public interests are always put before corporate interests. You listen to The Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. My name's Joseph Toscano. This program is streaming live on 3cr.org.au. It's coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. This program is broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. That's right, the Community Radio Network. You can leave messages on 0439 395 489. 0439 395 489. You can write to me, you can email me at info@pibci, PIBCI.net. You can actually write to me at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. Facebook pages, Joseph Toscano, Toscano for the Public, Defend and Extend Public Housing, everybody's business, and the list goes on and on. Doesn't matter how many web pages you've got. The key to change is you taking up that baton which is currently lying on the ground. Let's move on. Well, humiliation, starvation, mass murder. It's happening in Gaza. That's right. Well, I speak. 31,857 people killed. Over 13,500 children. That's right. The United States continues to provide military aid to the Israeli military forces. The world watches on. What we are seeing in Gaza, we have not witnessed this century. Now, don't think of Gaza as some huge sovereign nation state. I think Gaza is about 40 kilometres by about 30 kilometres, about 2.5 million people live in this little area. It's one of the most densely populated areas on the planet, and for all and it's been the world's biggest prison since they I think elected Hamas in 2014. So people say Israel has the right to defend itself. I'll give you a simple example. If somebody breaks into my home and they threaten me, and I get the upper hand and bash them over the head, and they fall on the ground, and they're no longer a threat to me, do I have the right to get a cricket bat and bash them to death? I don't. The same with the Israeli carnage. You can't call it a war. This is carnage. I mean, we're told they've killed thousands of Hamas operatives. Let's look at the figures. 31,816 dead as a direct result of the war. Who knows how many indirect result of the war? 13,500 children. That leaves, well, you couldn't really think of them as enemy combatants, could you? So that leaves 17, what is that, 17, about 17,000. Now, of those 17,000, another half would have been women, or maybe even a third, elderly. Come on. Think about it. This is a war crime, if there's such a thing as a war crime. This is humiliation, degradation, mass murder on an industrial scale, starvation as a weapon of war. And we continue to support the State of Israel. I was interested to see the International Olympic Committee has banned Russia and Belarusian athletes from competing in the Paris Olympics under the Russian and Belarusian flag. And tick. Why haven't they banned the Israeli athletes? Considering what their government has done. Why hasn't the Australian government recalled the Australian ambassador from Israel and expelled the Israeli ambassador from this country? Because you see, at the end of the day, this is the best thing that's happened to Hamas as a political organisation. The Israeli government and those Israelis who support their government's current policies in Gaza don't seem to realise that this is the best recruitment policy for Hamas. And it is irreparable. The Israeli state has been irreparably damaged, not in terms of the pain and anguish of the murder of 1,200 Israeli civilians and the kidnapping of another 250 has caused, but it has been irreparably damaged by its government's reaction or overreaction to what happened. And let's not forget, this so-called attack, secret attack, happened in one of the countries which claims it has the best secret service in the world. Now, it's untenable. Israeli citizens need to understand that what is happening in Gaza is untenable. They may have a short-term victory, but once the dust settles down, they will find themselves in a much more difficult situation they found themselves pre the 7th of October. But ultimately, it's us. Don't forget that, it's us. We support it. You know, it's the same everywhere. If they're our allies, we'll support them to the end of the earth. If they're not, well, they're bad guys, aren't they? Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Now, obviously, in every city there are protests. I encourage you to join them, because what is happening in Gaza currently is just unimaginable. Unimaginable. Let's move on. Now, Vladimir Putin has just won the election in a landslide. I think he got 88% or something. Now, what people don't seem to understand is that, you know, as an authoritarian populist, and I'll say he's an authoritarian populist because he's got rid of his opposition, what people forget is that Putin is actually a product or a direct consequence of the fall of the Soviet Empire. It's because Putin, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, is a privatisation pin-up boy. Now, let's not forget that when the Soviet Union collapsed, I think it was 1989, I could be wrong there, when the Soviet Union collapsed, two things happened. One, a number of satellite states broke off and declared their independence, about 20 of them. And much more importantly, all those state enterprises which existed became private property of individuals, many senior bureaucrats in the Russian Communist Party. So what we saw was the wholesale privatisation of public institutions, and these public institutions, their ownership was put in the hands of a minuscule number of people. There were other options. These public institutions could have been collectivised and the ownership put in the hands of the workers. But no, they were put in the hands of private individuals who rapidly became very, very powerful in the new Russian state. And these are the very people that have backed Vladimir Putin and his programs. It's been these new economic czars who used public property to enrich themselves, who now form the Praetorian Guard of President Vladimir Putin. So once again, we are seeing what happens when public assets are privatised, especially when extensive public assets become the private property of a handful of individuals. So whether it's Putin's Russia or Albanese's Australia, we have the same problem. Corporate capitalism seems to be at the heart of most of the problems that we face as human beings. But unfortunately, we don't see this. In an era of misinformation and disinformation, when technological innovations make it almost impossible to know what is real and what isn't, we have this era which is very familiar to what happened in Europe in the 1920s. We have an era where nothing changes, where what we see is the rise and rise and rise of authoritarianism, whether it's a populist brand or authoritarians who have self-appointed, have seized state power through economic support, through elections. And we don't see that the corporatisation and globalisation and privatisation and deregulation at the root of the problem. We begin to think that the other is the root of the problem. The person who wears the funny hat or scarf. The person who speaks a different language. The person whose colour is different. The person of a different sexual orientation. And the list goes on and on. They're the problem. If we can focus on them as the problem, we don't have to focus on what is the very real problem, the fact that the parliamentary system has been subverted by the interests of corporations in the Western world, and in the rest of the world, what is described as a parliamentary system is nothing more than a dress rehearsal for some authoritarian ruler to seize state control, whether through direct support through privatised public assets, as we see in Putin's Russia, or direct support to the corporate sector through legislation, as we see in parliaments around the world. As we're told, there is no other way. That capitalism, private investment for private profit, is the only mechanism via which we can actually survive as a community, and nothing is more ludicrous. Now, we've currently seen climate protesters being put in jail. At the same time, we hear that human-induced climate change is creating a climate emergency. In 2023 was the hottest year on record, greatest glacier melt, and the list goes on and on. But because of corporatisation and the philosophy that we have that we need exponential growth, that nothing can interfere with growth, that we need to, allow to keep government out of the way of corporate profits, and more importantly, we need corporate welfare. The fact is, the climate emergency will continue to get worse. It doesn't matter how many electric cars you have, or how many solar panels you have, or how many wind farms you have. while you have an economic system which is based on the concept of growth for growth's sake, which requires ever-increasing profits to ensure shareholder return, it's almost impossible to put a brake on the climate emergency. And that's what I said at the beginning of the program. Reality has a nasty habit of biting us in the bum. You can have every belief system in the world. You can believe everything you see on the net. You can blame as many people as you like for your current situation. The fact is that the reality of the situation we find ourselves in is directly linked to the economic system, which is dominated by a minority of people, which has created so many problems and which continues to create so many problems which now cross sovereign borders. We are a global society because CO2 doesn't care about borders. It doesn't care. You listen to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Now, people say, Joe, this is your 47th year broadcasting. Why do you bother? Well, sometimes I ask myself, why do I bother? Well, I bother because I read history. Because things change. Because sometimes individuals and sometimes groups initiate that change. Because ultimately, things change. And they don't change because of massive technological innovations, and we've seen that with the growth of social media. I mean, social media was going to be the great democratiser. Everybody was going to be a citizen journalist. We were all going to profit because of the decentralisation of power. The fact is, it's been the other way around. What we've seen is the centralisation of power and these technological giants which dictate terms to sovereign nation states. And nothing changes. Despite all these technological innovations, despite having a computer in our pockets if you've got one of those fancy mobile phones, despite being able to click your way to oblivion on the internet, supporting this or that, or go down little rabbit warrens and becoming obsessed with myths about particular issues. Because you see, nothing changes through technological innovation. Change comes through breaking down hierarchy, through devolving power, through holding wealth in common and using it for the common good. And the fact is, irrespective of who we are, what we do, reality wins. It wins every time. And irrespective of people waving their national flags, saying how wonderful they are, how horrible the enemy is, irrespective of how many people are jailed for their beliefs or for their actions, to change society, the fact is that change is still possible. But not change in a vacuum. Change in a vacuum is impossible. Because people tend to think of themselves and the people around themselves, not of the community as a whole. And that's the difference between what's happening in Haiti and what's happening in Gaza. In Haiti, we've seen the breakdown of the nation state. In Gaza, we've seen a people who are coming together because of the situation they find themselves in. That's the difference. It's all very well for me to pontificate till the cows come home, but the fact is nothing changes unless people are willing to take action. Not in terms of some spectacular action, like blocking a road, but in terms of doing that hard work, joining groups, creating groups, fighting for different issues. Because ultimately, we are the people we've been waiting for. It's not the religious leader down the road, the politician in Parliament, the would-be politician, the corporate leader, the philanthropist, the media hack. We are the people we've been waiting for. And that's the art of joining the dots, an art which has been lost in an era of technological misinformation, disinformation. We've always had misinformation and disinformation. The only difference today is that it's almost instantaneous. In the past, you had to think about it, read a book, listen to a radio program, think about it. Today, instantaneous, misinformation, disinformation. And those people who are concerned about the growth, as I began the program with, of authoritarian populism, do have a great need to be concerned, because authoritarian populism does not produce results that are conducive to good health. It produces division, hatred, inequality, civil war, things which seem impossible today can be tomorrow's reality. Now, many people think, well, civil war is impossible in Australia. Look at Sudan, engulfed in civil war. Look at Haiti, engulfed in civil war. And the list goes on and on. The fact is that unless we organise now, not tomorrow, but now, and we set up collectives, cooperatives, groups to actually create a dual power situation to challenge the continuing structures we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, we will find that it'll be too late when the authoritarian populist is elected to power or seizes power, because that's when the state apparatus, as we saw during World War II, is used to destroy any opposition, whether it's Putin's Russia, whether it's Chinese Communist Party's China, whether it's Biden Trump's America. The fact is that ultimately, unless we are willing to create that new society now and create those little institutions and groups that can act as a focus and that can assist organising resistance to the growth of corporate capitalism in this country, that unless we do that now, it will be too late when the authoritarian populists seize power or are elected into power. You've been listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. My name is Joseph Toscana. You want to leave messages? 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489. You can email us at info@pipsy.net. That's public interest before corporate interests. Don't forget, there's no meeting tonight. There's no presentation at the Footscray Hotel. It'll be next week if you listen to this program in Melbourne town. You can write to us. Yes, I do answer letters. Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. YouTube channel, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest. You can join Public Interest Before Corporate Interest. Go to pipsy.net and join today. Doesn't cost a cent. Unbelievable, I know. You can Facebook pages, Joseph Toscano. Web pages, anarchistmedia.org. Public Interest Before Corporate Interests. YouTube channels, josephtoscano.nam. Public Interest Before Corporate Interests. Facebook pages, Defend and Extend, public housing, everybody's business. I could go on and on. I'm not going to. It's up to you. Do what you have to do to survive, but more importantly, do what you have to do to change the future. The future is in your hands, not my hands, your hands. Listen in to the Anarchist World this week, next week.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
You might have heard about the Community Radio Plus app, but it's only when you start using it that you'll wonder how you lived without it.
You can listen to us wherever you are, at home, work, driving,
On public transport, gardening, protesting, or even in the bath.
just search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.